Dricus Du Plessis has been making headlines in the MMA world as yesterday he was kind of doing a little bit of a media tour, right? I always like when we get a champion, they get a huge win, they kind of duck off for a little bit, and then they come back and they just seem like they're rearing to go. And that's the vibe I'm getting from DDP here. But guys, look, this all started with, I'll link the video down below that I made yesterday, where in the beginning I show you the clip where he was on like a little sit-down podcast. He gave his thoughts and a recap of what he thought of UFC 308's co-main event between Khamzat Chimaev and Robert Whittaker. And he basically said, like, look, I want Khamzat next. I think he's the hottest thing in the division right now in terms of, like, this is the big name. This is a guy that this does a lot for my legacy. You know, if I can go in there and take the O of Khamzat Chimaev, and that clip just blew up, man. So I would imagine that these different media outlets started reaching out to him like TMZ. But I really wanted to look at an ESPN MMA, which obviously that's the one we're going to look at here with Brett Okamoto, because there's a lot in this interview that I want you to see. And we're going to start with him kind of talking about, you know, who's next, right? Because DDP, it's hard to not like this guy. Like, look, this dude, not only is he a really fun kind of personality, he's got like a sneaky personality, man. He's got a good trash talking game. He's making dudes cry before fights. Like, he has an effect on people. And this is a guy that is becoming very, very marketable for the UFC, not only because, you know, some of the mic skills that we're starting to see, but overall, he is a world-class fighter. I mean, Dricus is an absolutely spectacular fighter, and to see him being so willing to take on the hardest challenges in the division. You know, most guys like Merab Dvalishvili, as I like to call him these days, he's like looking for every reason not to fight Umar. A guy like Bilal Muhammad is looking for the next best guy. That's why he's fighting Shavkat Rakhmonov. We are looking at champions now in the UFC that are willing to step up and fight the who's who. Like Alex Pereira, the guy's like fighting every other week. Like, I absolutely love what is going on with the champions in the UFC right now. This is a perfect example. But enough of me rambling here. I want, you know, you guys to hear some of these different things, because not only is he going to talk about who he wants next, but his willingness to fight either Strickland or Chimaev. He's going to give his thoughts on who the best, you know, 185er is right now outside of him. And then he's going to talk about the South Africa event timeline, right? I know I got a lot of DDP fans here on the channel, and we've all kind of been wondering, well, when is the UFC going to South Africa? We're going to hear what DDP has heard and what he knows so far from the UFC on that, and then we will end with his thoughts on Poatan Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev, just because, you know, we've heard DDP possibly wanting to fight Pereira, so you may hear a little bit of that as well, but we'll get that at the end. But let's start with who's next.
Well, let me tell you this. Obviously, the conversations were more on fighting Strickland, but there was a very big reason no contract's been signed. And I'm saying this as an opinion. I agreed. I said, I'll fight Strickland. Perfect. That's the fight the fans want. But if you go on what the fans want right now, it's definitely not the Strickland fight. And if you ask me, what do I want? I want to fight the best guy. I want to fight the guy the fans want me to fight. And that 100% is Khamzat.
So right away, right? So DDP, this is, how can you not like this, man? Like, he's very in tune to like what the MMA world and like what the fans want. Like, he's out here like, well, I know I had a close fight with Sean Strickland, and he's like, that rematch, like, yeah, it's a good fight, it's a good rematch. But Khamzat's like the big name right now. Like, he's always been a big name, but him going out there and doing that to Robert Whittaker, DDP knows, man. He's like, this is the big fight for me.
You know, if they give me the Strickland fight, great. I'll fight Strickland in February or March or whenever, and then fight Khamzat. But, you know, with the hype right now and what the fans are feeling, and at the end of the day, they are the people that need to be entertained. And if you go on value for the UFC, and if you ask me personally, the Khamzat fight's what I want. I want to take his I want to beat the next best guy, and I've beaten Sean Strickland. You know, everybody can have their opinion on how close the fight was. Yeah, it was close. But there's not a doubt in my mind if I won that fight or lost that fight. And the win is on my record. I've been in there with him. And what excites me right now is getting in there and beating Khamzat Chimaev. That would be first prize. That's what I want. And, you know, wherever he wants to do it. You know, I know he has some traveling issues. I don't know the extent of those issues, but, you know, I'll fly wherever I need to get that fight. You know, I'll fight him in his hometown. I don't know where he resides currently, but I'll go there and we can fight there. That's the fight the fans want to see. And, you know, for my legacy, that's the fight I want.
I mean, how can you not respect it? How can you not like that? Like, you have a champion who, Dricus is the champ. Like, he's not some contender who's trying to kind of make a name for himself and just calling people out for the hell of it. This is a champion saying, okay, You guys think that Chimaev is the boogeyman in the division, which it's looking like that, right? I mean, no one's just like signing up and super excited to fight a guy like Khamzat, who has like this kind of scary aura in terms of he's got a really troubling style for a lot of guys. He's got outstanding wrestling. He has pretty good striking. His finishing ability is just second to none. That's not someone everyone is just signing up to fight. And here you have Dricus saying, I'll go to his backyard, wherever the hell. I don't care where we fight. I will take the matchup. I want to take his O. And you have to think about this. Look, a rematch with Strickland, it's not to say that DDP doesn't want that fight, but the thought of going in there against this guy who kind of has like this aura of invincibility, a big fan base, Khamzat Chimaev is a superstar, and to go in there and be the first one to possibly take that O, that is a very motivating thing for a guy who is on top of the world right now, has just defended his belt against Izzy. This is a dude who's got to look for different things to really motivate him. You could definitely tell going in there and try to take Chimaev's O is definitely something that's driving DDP, man.
Is that just because you're willing to travel anywhere for the fight, or do you kind of like the idea of stacking the deck against you, or is it just simply to make the fight happen?
Yeah, it's simply to make that fight happen. Stacking the deck, I've gone very used to that. So, it will feel more comfortable, I guess. But, I'm used to, before my UFC career, I'm very used to being the favorite as well. So for me, it's only about one thing, and it is who is the next best guy, the baddest guy out there. That's the guy I want to fight. So right now, people are, thinking that Khamzat is the next best guy, but there's only one best guy, and that's me. So I want to prove that once again. And obviously, if you look at the amount of people that's going to watch a fight, there's more people that are going to want to watch me versus Khamzat and me versus Strickland. And at the end of the day, that's the only determining factor, is the guy that the people want to see. Because at the end of the day, they buy the tickets, they buy the pay-per-views, and they are the people we need to entertain.
See, guy gets it, man. He gets the what the fans want to see, the UFC business side of things, but then also the for legacy, for motivating DDP, what's going to excite him to get out of bed in the morning, because he's making quite a bit of money now, right? He's the champion, he's got, the fame, he's got all this stuff going on. So what is it that's going to get you out of bed and motivate you? It is very, very clear that Khamzat Chimaev fight, you're going to get a locked in and excited DDP. Not that he would be, he would still be excited to fight Strickland, but you can clearly tell that the Chimaev fight is new to him. We've heard guys talk about this a lot. Look, I like fighting someone new. You heard Izzy talk about this. The rematches get old, and I know that would kind of be DDP's first rematch, but that fight's usually kind of available, right? You'll have the Sean Strickland fight kind of waiting in the wings. DDP gets the game. The narrative of, well, you're only as good as your last fight, and that's kind of, I kind of agree with that, right? You don't want to forget what people have done, but he's like, look, Strickland went out there, put on a stinker against Costa. Chimaev goes out there and does that to Whitaker. Everyone's buzzing about Chimaev. Give me that fight.
Setting that aside, just from a competitive standpoint.
Now we got to move on here to 1354, where he's going to talk about who's the best 185er. So we just talked about it before, basically saying that it was him. But, you're going to get to hear his thoughts, man. I'm telling you, this guy, he wants the Chimaev fight. And also what you heard him say here, it kind of sounds like the UFC has plans for DDP to fight in early 2025. So whether they can make that happen or not, that's kind of what it sounds like. And you heard him before. The UFC was kind of waiting around to make a decision on, is Strickland going to, sign on the dotted line here to get that fight? Because we all kind of had this feeling that they were waiting to see what happened between Whitaker and Chimaev.
That is the number 2 middleweight in the world.
Well, I'm gonna answer that this way. Sean Strickland beat Paulo Costa in a very boring fight. Robert Whitaker went out there with an amazing performance against Paulo Costa, got rocked, came back, made it look easy, took a fight against Khamzat, then got a change in opponent fight week, made it look easy. So that automatically puts him above Strickland in my mind. And a rematch against Strickland also didn't really get me that excited. I knew how to beat him and I would do it again. So Khamzat comes out there, puts on. So if Khamzat beat Whitaker by decision, that wouldn't warrant him leapfrogging Sean Strickland. But doing what he did, the way he did it, it's hard to deny the man that he deserves the shot. And for me personally, once again, he is right now Because before that, like you said, he hasn't beaten the top of the division, but now he has. Sean Strickland hasn't beaten Robert Whittaker.
Dude, is this not all the arguments that, like, in that video I made yesterday? Like, we talked about this. This is what a lot of people are saying. He sounds like an MMA, like a fan, like just a fan of the sport, not some champion that's sitting on the throne. He sounds like a fan of the sport. He's like, look, the rematch with Strickland. He's like, Strickland, sometimes you don't know which guy you're going to get. Is he going to be boring? Is he going to be entertaining? Which I've said before, it takes a guy like DDP to make Strickland entertaining, because if you just want to have a back and forth point style of fight, you're going to get a boring Sean Strickland fight, which is why the Costa Strickland fight was boring. We didn't see the old Costa, a guy that was willing to move forward and get in the phone booth and try to slug it out. If we saw that, maybe it would have been more entertaining, but we saw a point version of Costa, so it was just like two dudes that just made it boring. Whereas DDP's like, look, I mean, I could go in there and fight Strickland. We saw that fight, and I do think that there's a shot that he could win that fight more convincingly, because I'm not so sure what Sean would necessarily do differently against DDP. Now, having said that, Sean fought a good fight against DDP. It was definitely a close fight, but I think DDP is kind of feeling the same way. Like, he's not ducking Strickland, right? What is he ducking? Strickland has a good fighting style when you know he's exciting, but it's basically just a guy that's going to throw a jab, a front kick, and then an occasional right hand. Like, it's nothing like that terrifying about fighting Strickland other than the jab, because he does probably have one of the best jabs in MMA. But outside of that, like, DDP is not ducking Strickland, right? People are going to say that. He's not ducking him. He's just like, I want the fight that everyone wants to see me fight.
Khamzat has. And Whittaker has been at the top of that division for very, very long. He's only been beaten by myself and Israel Adesanya. So, yeah, that warrants me, in my mind, warrants me a shot at the belt.
Okay, so now you hear that from DDP, but I want to move on to where Brett Okamoto is basically going to ask him, like, you heard Dana say Sean Strickland was next. Well, what are kind of your thoughts there, DDP? Because again, it's always interesting to hear from, like, the champ himself, because there was all that talk of Sean Strickland being the next, guy. Like, Dana was like, Strickland is next. Then he kind of at that, Dana White Contender Series post-event presser, he kind of walked that back a little bit. And I did a video on that. I was like, guys, the Strickland fans, don't get your hopes up, because it sounded like they were going to wait to see what happened at 308. And if this happened, this is like a worst case scenario for Strickland, in my opinion, because like DDP said, if Chimaev went out there and it was some, really close fight, or it wasn't that entertaining or whatever, no one would be talking about the title shot per se. But the fact that he did what he did to Whittaker kind of just changed the game. And it's definitely something the UFC, I think, was definitely hoping would happen.
Like, it was already kind of given, or is that just not how the fight game works?
No, that's not how the fight game works. The fight is given when the contract's signed, and the contract's not signed. So this is the fight game. We've seen this many times before.
So there's just his quick thoughts of him just basically being like, hey, man, nothing was signed. I'm good with whatever. So just good to hear that there from DDP to get his thoughts. But let's move on to 1627 here, where he is going to talk about the South Africa timeline, because this is something that we've kind of been wondering, right? The Israel Adesanya fight happened, and then there was like, well, are we going to get to South Africa? Dana's been very adamant about getting there, and having DDP headline an event. So let's hear what Dricus has heard so far, what he thinks. Let's get his thoughts.
So let me tell you this, the delegation was there, and for a very good reason. We are doing everything we can. They are doing everything they can. The UFC wants this to happen. Dana said my next fight is in South Africa. Obviously, there's challenges, but the challenges comes in one form. We need to put a roof on an arena. We need to put a roof on a stadium. The arenas aren't big enough, but the stadiums, we have world-class stadiums. We've hosted Rugby World Cup, Soccer World Cup, and we are busy doing all the things that are necessary to get that event here. Problem with that, it's probably going to take a while. These things don't happen overnight, and the talks aren't just talks; it's serious talks. The government and the UFC have been working very closely together to make this happen. I know that for a fact, and it's probably going to be late 2025 if everybody does what needs to be done. And right now, everybody is pulling their part.
And I just want to say this: how big of an event would that be? And like the UFC's talking with like the government of South Africa trying to work this out, like in a stadium where they host rugby. That would be crazy. Like they're talking about doing that in Spain with like Ilia Topuria. Like people that don't like know a lot about DDP, because I still feel like even though he's a champion and he's a world-class fighter, he still kind of like flies under the radar. Like not a lot of people are like really in tune with what's going on with like the South Africa, South African fan base. Like they are very, very strong supporters. Like they have got DDP's back. That would be a huge event. And not only that, having a champion who's now defended the title and just been spectacular in the UFC thus far, South Africa absolutely deserves an event. So, but now you're going to hear Dricus talk about, well, that's probably going to be late 2025. I want to be active, man.
So for me to sit around and wait for that, I'm at my age, young, I'm healthy, I'm ready to do it. So if I fight Khamzat next, I beat Khamzat Chimaev. And this is just me spitballing. I beat Robert Whittaker, then I beat Strickland, then I beat Israel Adesanya, then I beat Khamzat Chimaev. Mm-hmm. That warrants a double title fight. Mm-hmm. And I think that might just be it. So, I mean, for me, I have this vision, and I can't picture anything more perfect than that. But to be completely honest, I do not care who it is. South Africa would go crazy no matter who I fight. So, if I fight Khamzat now, then Strickland in South Africa, or fight Strickland now, fight Khamzat, International Fight Week, then come to South Africa, all that it's kind of a blur. But at the end of the day, there's a goal that needs to be reached, and that is fighting in my home country and getting that second belt. And to do those on the same night, that would be pretty sweet.
Now, I mean, how can you not like that, man? You got a guy here who's like, he's not saying like, I'm just going to sit around and wait to see if South Africa happens, maybe the end of the year. You have a guy who wants to be an active champion at 185. And what we saw before DDP, we had Strickland, he defended his belt in a rather quick turnaround after he beat Izzy against DDP. They got that going. So we've seen a lot of activity from the champions at 185 since Adesanya kind of took over. So we've kind of been like in a really good spot at middleweight, right? Because we see some divisions like where with like Leon Edwards, like they just like disappear for a year and we get like one fight a year. So like back when Usman was champ, getting very Volkanovski, active champions like this, we have Poatan, Bilal, DDP, like it is a hell of a time to be alive, man, in terms of MMA and the UFC. I mean, this is great to hear this from DDP. Now, I will say this, there is a lot of risk with that, right? So it's going to come down to, I know he wants to be active, but is the UFC going to be willing to roll the dice? Because if they are able to get that South Africa event booked, I still think whether he was the champ or not, they could still have DDP headline a card or be a part of it or whatever. But then you roll the dice. Like, what if he goes out there and does lose to Chimaev, or they book a Strickland rematch and he loses? Like, I'm not saying that those things are going to happen. I'm just saying hypothetically, if that happens, does that kind of like mess up the South Africa event? So that's kind of what that's going to come down to, is if the UFC feels comfortable kind of rolling the dice there. They're going to have a plan in place to make sure, that they can still go to South Africa, because I can tell you this right now, that event would absolutely be huge. I mean, could you imagine DDP in South Africa defending the belt against whether it's Chimaev, whether it's a Strickland rematch, whatever? I mean, those would be really, really big fights. I mean, I think that'd be funny to see like Strickland over there getting heckled by the fans, but man, if you're asking me right now which fight I want to see, I want to see DDP versus Chimaev, man. Like, I don't know how you couldn't want to see that fight at this point. The way Chimaev looks, we've seen DDP, the videos of him with his grappling and submission skills. Like, he's a big dude for the weight class. And then the opportunity to move up, to possibly take on Alex Pereira at 205. Man, dude, it's getting interesting, man. But okay, let's finish up real quick here with his thoughts on Pereira versus Ankalaev, because this is the fight that a lot of people are like, the UFC's keeping Ankalaev away from Poatan and all these different things. So let's hear what DDP thinks of Ankalaev's recent performance.
After this last performance, not a big one. Yeah, I don't think so. If you look at the way Rakic fought versus Yuri Prochazka, what Alex did to Prochazka, yeah, I mean, Ankalaev is a great fighter. He's an all-rounder. Obviously has great wrestling, but I think maybe, some fights that happen. Sometimes you just don't have and the styles make fights. Sometimes you just don't have the night that you wish you had. And yeah, it wasn't a great fight to watch. But, Ankalaev has, with Rakic, he has good defense and he has good ground game and he has all that. we don't know what happens when Ankalaev takes Pereira down. But just based on, and Alex Pereira is an absolute machine. The man is, yeah, right now, hard to deny him as one of the greatest fighters in the UFC for sure. So, I can't go against him at this stage unless he fights me.
So there you go. You got to hear from DDP, and the question was kind of like, is Ankalaev really a threat to Pineda? But what I like about DDP, man, he kind of like puts the bias to the side. Like you saw this with Israel Adesanya, as much as there was like this like beef going on there. Like he always gives people their due. He gives them their credit, and I absolutely like that about DDP. Like he can kind of put the BS to the side and be like, here's the facts. Chimaev's an outstanding fighter. He's a great grappler, great submissions. Pineda, outstanding fighter, monster, fighting all the time. How can you not like DDP, man? Just wanted to show you guys this interview here because there is no questions about it, man, that Dricus Du Plessis, he's going down as probably one of the greatest middleweights by all said and done, depending on how this can play out. I mean, but you got to love an active champion. I like his mindset. I like what he brings to the table. But if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps me out a lot. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I appreciate it. See you next time.